Morning. Kumlan Ablat Gemara. Today's daf is daf Mem Beis. We're still continuing discussing the different laws of tzitzis, and we are up to the Gemara here about 6 lines on the top of the Mem Beis Amud Aleph, about 6 lines from the top of the page. The last thing we learned about was whether there's a shear to the tzitzis. We gave the different opinions. We had sort of Rashi at the main time, and the third opinion, which I don't know if I mentioned yesterday, is the Rambam, who holds that the shear that we say that it has to be 4 fingers includes the braids and the strings hanging out. So technically, Sachakol, all you need is, which is practically nothing, is the width of 4 fingers. And imagine Gardumim, then you have even less. Not like Rabbeinu Tam, which halach is today, we follow Rabbeinu Tam, that has to be 12 fingers. Those four fingers was talking about the braided part, and the 8 fingers was talking about the strings hanging out. Or Rashi said that the 4 fingers is the strings hanging out, and the braided part is half of that, so that's 2. So at least you need 6 fingers. So you have like 3 opinions. 4 fingers the Rambam, 6 finger width of 6 fingers is Rashi, and the main time is the minimum of 12 fingers, which is how we rule. But there's no law of how long it can be and how long it should be. The longer, the better it is. What we learned? Tzitzis. What does the word tzitzis mean? Tzitzis el anav. Tzitzis means protruding. Excuse me. So up to the Beis Amud Aleph, we're up to Tanur Rabbanan. Tanur Rabbanan, 6 lines on the top of the page. So we learn tzitzis. What does the word tzitzis mean? Tzitzis el anav, it means the strings hanging out. It says vayikacheni betzitzis roshi. So talking about the hair on the head, pulled by the hair on the head, and they would say what? That means the hairs, which are all spread apart. They're all disparate hairs. But Omar Abaye said, "V'tzarich lifroida kitzutzisa de armoi," and he said that you have to make sure that the hairs are separated, just like the goyim and their hairstyles. That the hair might be attached on the bottom, but they're all they're opened up on the top. You have to make sure it's opened up. Now here we learn the halacha from here. We learn the halacha from here that every morning when you put on your tzitzis, you have to make sure the tzitzis are spread. And it's interesting, machlekes poskim. Some say that the Indian wants to separate the lovan from the tchelis. So all you have to really do today is, it's only a zeicher to remember there was 2 mitzvahs, like there's lovan and tchelis. All you have to do is separate 4 and 4. But from the lashon of the Gemara, it seems that you have to separate every single string. But the Magen Avram says that because it's only a zeichel, the tchelis, and all that, if you're late for davening, and this was delay the davening, you can go ahead and forego this. You don't have to go ahead and check the tzitzis. Others argue, they say the Gemara doesn't say anything about tchelis and love, and it says it's part of the word tzitzis means you have to make sure they're separated. The Prima Godim, if I remember correctly, brings a beautiful Rosh Hashanah. He said, you know what? The word tzitzis, the way Taisus pointed out, is spelled in the Torah, is Tzadik Yud, Tzadik Sof. There's no second Yud. Remember, we had a discussion, where does Rashi get 600 from? So he brings from the Mata Moshe, who's one of the Talmud of the Ramah, who says that the word tzitzis Rosh Hashanah, Tzadik is Tzadik, Yud is Yafrid, the next Tzadik is Tzitzi Yosef, and the next Tov is Tamid. You'll always separate tzitzis, whether you're late for davening, whether you're early for davening, doesn't matter. That's what tzitzis is.
It's talking about what we call Pasgod, right?
Yeah, we make a bracha. Yeah. Talking about Hitil al hakeren. One opinion says if you placed it mamish on the corner, which is that you made you made a hem, a thicker, like a second layer, to the end of your beged. If you mamish place it on the corner, it's kosher. Because at the end of the day, it's kanaf. It's a corner. Now, Blazman Yaakov says no. Poisel b'shtein. It has to be a bit removed from the very edge. It has to be in the corner area, but not mamish. And halacha of Blazman Yaakov. So who does this work according to? Rav Gidel said the name of Rav. He said tzitzis tzricha she'ino yitefel al keren. He says that it should be hanging above the keren. It says al kanfei bigdayim. The Sommer Shain Mulan Pshat that when it says here Shetain Tefis is in the word banging, and they say that the tzitzis should be in a way that it shouldn't be hanging vertically down; it should be a little like sideways, hitting the beged from the side.
Doesn't Noitet normally mean dripping out?
Noitet mean dripping. Yeah, that's how we learn. So he says it means somehow or another that it should be a little bit to the side here and then going down, so it hits the not from the top to hitting, rather than extra or dripping or whatever it is. Yeah. Like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who says it shouldn't be mamish at the edge; it should be raised a bit above. We learned yesterday it should be within. We had a machlekes, but we paskin it should be within the 3 fingers of the corner, but it should be more. It should be further away than the width of a thumb. Between the width of a thumb and 3 fingers from the corner, that's where you should put your. That's where you should have your beged. It have to distance more than a thumb. Now. The Papa said that you have to have within 3 fingers, and the Rabbi Yaakov, and Rabbi Yaakov says that you should be at least more than a thumb. Very difficult to understand what exactly Gemara is asking, why you need both. They're saying 2 different things. One is talking about the minimum distance, one is talking about the maximum distance. Anyway, the Gemara says, what do you need both? Papa thought you shouldn't be too far away, but on the contrary, maybe the closest to the corner, the better it is. He said, Rabbi Yaakov, no, it shouldn't be mamash on the corner. Rabbi Yaakov thought that it should be a minimum distance of the width of a thumb, it shouldn't be closer. The further, the better. In fact, we had an opinion yesterday, 4 fingers, maybe even 4 fingers, different you need. Eat both opinions. Ravina Rav Sama. Ravina Rav Sama V'Yasu was sitting Kamei de Ravashi before Ravashi. Chazi Rav Sama. Rav Sama noticed Lekarne de Glima de Ravina. He saw the corner of the garment that the Ravina was wearing. The sosa, he saw that it was torn. And was no longer, the bottom there where the scissors were coming out from was a bit torn on the edge, and therefore now it was less than the width of a thumb from where the tzitzis, were hooked on to further down. He said, so he turned around. Rav said to Ravina, what's going on here? It has to be a minimum of a kesher, of a good of a thumb. Let's talk about when you make it. Just like we had gardumim of the strings. Chatzila is a shear, but if it's less, as long as you have enough to make a knot, that's good enough. A bow is good enough. Same thing here. Chatzila has to be of a thumb, but if it's later, in fact, Ichsif, he got all embarrassed. He didn't realize it. Sorry? Rasamba. He was all embarrassed that he was wrong. That he himself was wrong. He said, don't get so nervous, don't get so excited. Ravina came from Israel. Even though he ends up being Ravina Ravashi, made the Gemara Bavli, he was an Israeli. He was a Sabra. And he said, no, the Chad Minaya, the Israelis are so smart. Because you saw Machkim, therefore he's equal to 2 of us. So he outsmarted you, doesn't mean anything. Interesting how it ends right here. But in Ksuvas, there was actually Abaye who made that comment. Abaye said, that one of them is I'm sure Malevi's grandson said something. So Abaye said that one of them is smarter, that's equally to 2 of us. Abaye said that. So Rava said, yeah, that's Kolzman was here and they're there. But the moment we, abovli, those that just throw, Chad Minon, is Kitrei Menayu. We're equal to that. Vaharaya, he says, Rav Yirmiyah, when he was in Babel, couldn't understand a word that we were talking about. He was one of an inferior Talmud. But as soon as he came to Yisrael, he started cursing us out. Hadi Bavloi Tipshoy, throw out Shas. Not sure what that proves. All it shows it became a chutzpah. Yeah. Achli, what's the lashon? They eat bread, they eat this and this, they eat dates. Yeah, exactly. Somehow or another that proves that he was smarter than us, rather than that he became a real Israeli chutzpah. But the point is that there's Milas has Milas Ahin. The Mechshakim Shavani is bubble, but that's the halacha. Rav Yaakov Rami, now this is it. Rav Achva Yaakov Rami, this is what he used to do. He used to put 4 strings, but he felt that the way we do it is we put 4 strings through the hole and then we hang them over and you have 2, you have 8. He felt that when you put them in already, it has to be the 8. So what he did was he folded it over. First he folded it over before he put it tzitzis. And then 8 strings. After it was folded, that's when he put it through the hole. Then he ends with 16, no? No. He folded over already. he pushes the whole thing through the hole, and then he takes maybe he takes one of the loose strings that are hanging down there, and he puts it through there to make it a knot and make it the whole thing work. Because somebody holds beina tamnaya big delima. He holds that you already have to have the 8 when you put it through the shirt. How do you know you have to have 4 strings which become 8? Because it says gedil. Gedil means braided. That means already 2 strings. Then it says gedilim, which is double that, which is already 4 strings. And since you need it for lovin and you need it for tchelis, so we know in total you have 8. You have 8 strings. The other opinion says Rav Yirmiyah Medifti Rami Tamnaya Dinu Shitzer. He did 8 strings, it became 16. Because he holds Gedilim, Gedil is 2, Gedilim is 4 long strings, and then you have to have another 4 long strings, it comes to 16. But he didn't make that knot. But my brother, done, just like we do it. We have 4 strings, we fold them through, and that's that. Taisa, the whole discussion is there about Taisa if you add more strings. And we had 2 days ago in the Gemara about Hitul Mutelis, and that if you already have strings, then you add another layer. We talked about Machlekes Rava and Papa, where Rava said it's waiting, for if you take the other ones, this becomes kosher. And Papa says, no, it's Bal Taisif. Or Rava says it's Bal Taisif, and therefore right now nothing happened. And when you cut away the first strings, it's as if he became kosher now. And Papa says, how do you know he did it for the sake of a mitzvah? Maybe he did it to cancel the other ones. So Tesis said there's a difference if there's no maximum in the Torah how many strings you have, so Tesis. So if you make 8 long strings, which become 16, and you braid them all together, that's kosher, that's your mitzvah. The problem with Hitim Matelis is you braided 4 strings and you made your tzitzis, and then you decide to add another layer. You already did your mitzvah. You decided that your mitzvah will be 4 long strings, and then you went ahead after you braided and you had your strings, you made another batch. That's already about Tosef. But if Chatzila decided to make 8 long strings that become 16, according to Tosef in the first long Tosef in this Pedic, it's all right. Fascinating. All these dinim of tzitzis are so little in the Torah, and we have to glean and learn where do you know all these things from. So anyway, right, we found Rabbi Rabba, he was placing the strings. He was making a bracha, tzitzis. Make a bracha on tzitzis. As you know, the Rishalmi says that 3 mitzvahs you make a bracha. When you make a sukkah, you make a bracha. And when you make a sukkah, you make a bracha. When you make tzitzis, you make a bracha. And also when you make film, you make a bracha. Just making it. And that's a right. That sukkah, we say that there's a mitzvah of making the sukkah. Yerushalmi. So we also had a Rashi in Menachos Daf Ches. So if you hold that as a mitzvah, so no, by tzitzit also, there's a mitzvah in making the tzitzit as well. So the Gemara says here, Rav Nachman once saw Rabbi Rabba, and he made a bracha last tzitzit, like the Yerushalmi says. As if to say there's a mitzvah in making the tzitzis. Amalei, my tzitzi is making fun of him. What's a tzitzi? I hear you saying. Shemana. Rav said tzitzis ain't tzich a bracha. You don't make a bracha when you make tzitzis. You don't make kinoch nafshe de Rav Huna. When Rav Huna passed away, all Rav Chizda went up lemirma to ask a question from Rav and Rav. Rav said over here that you don't make a bracha. In other words, that sees the what? That there's no mitzvah, whatever it is. Rav said there's no bracha. Rav said you don't need a bracha. Rav, you know Rav. Rav uses the name of Rav. Menayel tzitzis b'yuchav mishipsula. I know that goy cannot produce tzitzis. It says daber b'nei Yisrael, but also lem tzitzis. Speak to the b'nei Yisrael. Let's make tzitzis. B'nei Yisrael yasuv lo yavli cham yasuv. Not goyim. Traces here is big mach. Traces the gittin and the big machrik Rishonim whether women are allowed to make tzitzis, because usually we say b'nei Yisrael v'lo b'nei Yisrael. Here we say b'nei Yisrael v'lo akum. So Taisa right here, small little Taisa says, I'll just read to you because it's interesting Taisa, and just happened last year all over the world. Mashma seems ha'isha ksheda. A woman is kosher. Now, because by tefillin it says, Shartim uchsaftim, mi sheyeshna b'ksheda yeshna b'ksheda. Whoever has the mitzvah of the tefillin.
If someone's mechuyev in the mitzvah,
we're saying Misha ain't big shit, ain't big siva. So Rabbeinu Tam therefore says the same thing applies to tzitzis. That if those who are not chayiv, tzitzis cannot make the tzitzis. So a woman cannot make tzitzis, and the same thing as a cotton. They have no chiv. Tracy says, but from this Gemara here, he argues Rabbeinu Tam. His Gemara here, it seems clear that a woman can make tzitzis. A woman can make tzitzis, and some explain that what's the hezbollah behind it. When it comes to tefillin, this kedusha, you're right. The pashas, because there's kedusha, you have to have a shaykhus to the mitzvah. If you don't have the mitzvah, how can you do it? When it comes to tzitzis, there's no kedusha in the actual producing of the tzitzis, and therefore anyone could do it. A guy, you have a pasuk. What do you need a pasuk for a guy if the din is whoever is shaykh to the mitzvah? Of course, a guy can't do it, and yet you have a pasuk to tell you that a guy can't do it. So a woman can. And the halacha shana, by the way, is that a woman can make tzitzis, but like chatchila you shouldn't. So when they had this mitzvah, everyone, all the soldiers were getting tzitzis. There were women all over the world sitting there and putting together. Says the Gemara. It says, what does it say? They shouldn't do it. So what's the question? So what's the question? Where's the study? What's that to do with anything with the brach? So he goes on. What's the question? Rabbi Yisrael said, Rav Chizda holds. This is the rule. Oh, you're saying the bracha ashay kiddushanu mitzvah tzivanu. So it has to be self-evident that there's some kedusha here, and only we were told. So kol mitzvah shekshayda, if a guy can do it as well, hakin say kiddushanu mitzvah, and a guy can do the same thing. B'Yisrael ain't levarich, because hakin say kiddushanu mitzvah. In fact, the beautiful Magen Avraham says, why don't you make a bracha by Shalosh Shudas in Hilchos Shabbos? Why don't you make a bracha Shalosh Shudas in Mitzvah Ma'atayda and make a bracha Sheker Yisham Mitzvah Zvanu Lechol? Or the Magen Avraham talks about in Hilchos Purim. Why don't you make a bracha when you eat Shudas Purim coming up? It's a mitzvah to eat Shudas Purim. So he says, any mitzvah that we do, the act looks like anything that mundane thing that everybody eats. Throughout the week, you eat. Goyim eat all the time. How can you say Asher Kedusha of Mitzvah? It has to be self-evident from the mitzvah that is Kedusha. And where do you get that from? From right here, this Gemara here.
That's the same question for all the mitzvahs of Purim. So one is every day you send food back to other people.
So the same logic. So the same logic for all that. It doesn't stand out. Kedusha of Mitzvah. A guy cannot do it. Only Yisrael make a bracha. If anyone to close, that's true. But Mila, what about this Mila? The Ksheida by a guy can mala. Actually, it's a machlek. We'll soon see. A guy can mala. The time you learned Yiddish ain't but reifa. So see, it doesn't have a Jewish doctor. Reifa means a mile. The yeshba reifa a mile. You don't have a goyish doctor, but reifa kusi. And you have a kusi. A kusi are the gadim, but they go to avodah zara. That's a machlekes. And when we found out they went to the haragrizim, so retrospectively, were they real gadim? Gedi aroya saying or gedi emes saying? Machlekes amein chamin. But so kusi is a yid. But he's worse because he's Ovid Avodah Zarah. A guy, he's talking about a guy who's not an Ovid Avodah Zarah, but he's a guy who has no mitzvah. Kusi has a mitzvah, but he's Ovid Avodah Zarah. Is Yimel Amay better the guy because we'll say Stam al Lishma, why else he maling and so on. The Al Yimel Kusi, even Meir. And Abiyudah says Kusi v'lo Amay. No, he said here that they get the Kusi. Because the kusi is eat for it. Not my Uvisrael tzarich levarich. So the chayda, it says here you shouldn't get a guy, right? It says you shouldn't get a guy to do it according to we'll call it a mayor. Sorry, according to Yehuda, you shouldn't get a guy to do it. Sorry. According to the mayor, a guy is allowed to mala. A guy is allowed to mala according to the mayor, not a kusi, but a guy is allowed to mala. And yet, according to everybody, you make a bracha on bris hamilah. If your logic is that if a guy can do it no longer, you can say Ashakir Shonu Tzavanu, or we sell to the Vada, Hamal, I'm Barak Shonu al Milah. So you can immediately time. Who we're asking the question on? Rav. Rav Mipsel Posel. Rav holds a guy cannot do it, and therefore Taki you could say a bracha. It's consistent. It's the name of Rav. The Ato is brisi tishmoel. That only who should be involved in the brisi only those who have the mitzvah bris. And the says himol yimol was a double talk. Himol yimol. That was hamol yimol. Whoever, if you yourself have the mitzvah milah, so then you can go mal others. Says the Gemara, Sukkah Misayeh, this principle that you have, that if a goy cannot do it, you make a bracha. If a goy could do it, you don't make a bracha. Sukkah will support that we don't make a bracha last Sukkah, because Sukkah's akam is kosher. If a goy builds, so as long as he did it, test with it, as long as he did it for shade, it's good enough. So therefore we see tak, we don't get bracha. But tefillin is going to be a problem. What's going on here? How the sukkah dikshayed by the time the sukkah guy built it or women or before you build it for shed for animals or for kusim sukkah mekolakas kosher b'vach name is a chayches kilchos. You did it right. You put it it's done properly, and you did it for shade. It has to be the same sale. Over Yisrael ain't so itakron gebracha. Time you learn how oisa sukkah latzma. What do you make? What bracha you make? Baruch atam yichosh. Achiyam kiman zman hazeh. You sit down, but you don't make such a bracha. You don't make any bracha here. Lases. The ilu lases sukkah loymavarach. You don't make a bracha lases. So that's a sort. We make sure everybody. So we say the kiddush shechianu tastes in sukkah. The kiddush by shechianu by kiddush carries over to that. Yeah. Tefillin is a problem. Why is it a problem? But it's filling the psula bechavim. A guy cannot make tefillin. So according to you, we should say last is by tefillin. The time China Berei Rabbe Mipishranya. Sefer Teide Tefillin and Mezuzah Shekos von Tzeduki. If a Tzeduki wrote it, or a Kusi, or a Eved Gechavim, or an Eved or Isha Bekotten Mumer, they're all possible. Shartim Ksaftim. Shenemak Shartim Ksaftim Koshe Yeshna Bikshida Yeshna Biksiva. Koshe Eina Bikshida Eina Biksiva. Over Yisrael and so we should be able to make a bracha. Yet we saw a Yid does not make a bracha. How do we know that? The Shalach of Chibur and Abuna Mashmei Rav Yechon Tefillin Sheyad Oime. What bracha do you make? Hashem Kisham is what we had before. Laniach Tefillin. And now Tefillin Sheroi. What bracha do you make? A Tefillin Sheroi. You make Hashem Kisham on Mitzvahs Tefillin. The Ilu last Tefillin. No such bracha. This is the problem of Chizda. So Gemara now comes along and says, okay, this is what we're going to explain. This is how it works. So one person made a bracha there, I'm making tzitzis, and the Rav said you don't. What's the machlekes? Whole mitzvah, the asi yosa gemar mitzvah. This is the end of the mitzvah, l'moshel milah. You do the milah, that's it. It's over. So then, if the asi is the gemar mitzvah, then you make a bracha. I don't care if it's kosher by a goy. Even if I have the opinion that it's kosher by a goy, like Rabbi Yehuda, B'Yisrael, Tzor Levorach, you make a bracha. Why?
The father would make the bracha.
Yeah, but that's not the point. The point is because the asiyah and the mitzvah are coming at the same time, so you make a bracha with asiyah.
I'm asking because you're getting a goy to do the bris. So who's making the bracha?
Okay, yeah, you're right. The whole mitzvah, the asiyah, lav gemar mitzvah, but any mitzvah with asiyah is not gemar mitzvah. L'mashal tefillin. Tefillin, you made it tefillin, but that's the mitzvah to put it on. Is afagav the psulim chaban? Okay, the guy is irrelevant. B'Yisrael ain't tzarich levarich. So what about tzitzis? Interesting. But tzitzis b'halka miflagi. And then the machlek is not between Rav Chizr. Rav Chizr didn't give an opinion. He was by Rav. It's between Rav Nachman and that person who made a bracha, and Rav Nachman made fun of him. Tzitzi, and Rav Nachman in the name of Rav. Now, this is interesting. This is machlekes. We learned yesterday about a whole machlekes if the mitzvah of tzitzis is on the beged or is on the person. Once you put it on, you have a mitzvah. So one opinion says chayvas talosu. The moment you have a arba kanfas beged, you already have to put on tzitzis. I don't give you weird. So the ma'isa. So therefore, then when you make the tzitzis, that's the gemar ma'isa. So that's it. I don't care if you're weird. Or it's a chayv on the person. So when you made the tzitzis, there's no chayv yet. So you can make a bracha lasses. When does the mitzvah start? Only when you put it on. So therefore, you don't make a bracha lasses. There's a very interesting Magen Avraham. He talks about, he wants to know why by mezuzah, he says a mod nazach. So by mezuzah, what bracha do we make?
Why?
What's the kvoya? That's lasses.
Putting it up on the wall.
That's lasses. He said why? He said that l'chayde mezuzah is just like tzitzis. Chayvas hadori. If you live in the house, you put a mezuzah. If you don't live in the house, you don't put on mezuzah. And yet, what bracha do we make? Dafke likvoya. Instead of saying loder, which is the mitzvah, he's making likvoya. And by tzitzis, which is chayvas gavra, which means if I don't make tzitzis, I'm not chayv. It's only if I put it on, I have a chiyuv. And here suddenly we say, no, you can't make lasses. You got to make a lisata tzitzis or a mitzvah tzitzis. He wants what the difference is. So he sort of says that I can't remember what he answers. I can't remember. Sorry, my apologies. But he makes a difference between mezuzah and tzitzis. But he comes to the conclusion is that he says since there's no mitzvah of wearing, there's no mitzvah of he says over there because there's no mitzvah of putting a mezuzah in the house till you move in. Usually you put the mezuzah on the day you move in. So the gemar asiyah is when the mitzvah starts. When does the mitzvah start? When you move in, the moment you move in. And that's when you put the mezuzahs on. So by tzitzis, you put the tzitzis on before you wear it. So therefore, you can't make a bracha lasa because when you did it, there's nothing happening. Only later. But by mezuzah, so then he concludes. But if you put a mezuzah on the door before you move in, which a lot of people do, as soon as they rented or whatever, before they moved in, he paskins that you don't make a bracha l'kvay mezuzah. You wait till you go into the house, and then the bracha, he makes a new bracha there. Hashem says, don't know if modern Sfarim bring this Magen down, but it's in the Chasitzis.
We don't...
never heard of it. It's
I'm saying,
because you never heard of it. It's in Hilchot Tzitzis, not in Hilchot Mezuzah. But that's what the Morgan Ram says right here.
So you should wait until you moved in and then put them in.
That's what he says. Or you put something into the house. It's really like you moved in. You put a salt and pepper set or something, which is a mini or Sfarim. This is how you learned it. You said that a goy is possible making tzitzis, and nan hochim masninala. I learned fakert. In the name of Rav, a goy can make tzitzis. Never it says daber bnei Yisrael. Okay, you kvetch bnei Yisrael. Al dashan v'asu. They will make tzitzis. Who's a they? Who's making the tzitzis on your behalf? But others will make it. But all the nachayev. So who's left? Must be the goy. Why couldn't it be women who don't have the mitzvah? Don't know. But we decided also means goyim. When we actually learned this Gemara in Sukkah, the test, and the big Machel Shem Halalam Shat. Osan min hakoitzim. If you made strings of tzitzis from koitzim, Rashi learns all of these cases are cases where the thread is part of where you made the garment, and there's leftover thread or leftover wool, or leftover strings. So min hakoitzim is, if let's say one of the threads tore, so you make a knot, and that knot becomes hard like a rock, and then when you finish your thing, you'll always have you put your hand over there, you'll see suddenly there's a piece. That's a knot in the strings there. So if you made this knot there, and from the knot you let some of the strings hang out, and that became your tzitzis. Or umin hanimin, which is that you make some stitches over there, and there's leftover stitches hanging down. Or min agard, in the very bottom of the beged, you have fringes hanging down, and you made the tzitzis. All of them are possible. Why? Oh, you're right. It's a fringe, exactly. Apostle. They're all possible. Why? What's the chsaron? The chsaron is that you need asi lishma. We're not saying the chsaron is l'chayda, and afterwards you cut it off, so l'chayda the chsaron would be ta'asa v'lay mina'asu. We don't say that. And it seems from Rashi here, an amazing thing, that tzitzis does not have to be a separate thing from the beged. The problem here is because it's sort of you didn't do lishma. But if you would have done it lishma, all these cases, if you would have done it lishma, it would have been kosher.
Extra threads hanging. Yeah,
the fringes. When you were making it, I have in mind that the leftover fringes should be my tzitzis. You would be yaitz, even though it's not a separate part. We know that the tzitzis has to become part of the big. You have to make a knot and all that. We know that because otherwise, why would the Torah, as we had the Gemara a few days ago, why would the Torah come along and say Klaim is mutter tzitzis? Remember, in order to be Klaim, it has to become part of the beged. If you just give one stitch of a piece of wool on a linen beged, there's no Klaim. Why did the Torah have to tell you allowed to put Klaim on tzitzis? It must be that it becomes part of the beged. So we know it has to become part of the beged. But to go this far, to say that according to Rashi, that the beged can be the tzitzis is amazing.
It's very interesting because it actually, the Lashon HaPosuk would think otherwise.
Yeah.
You have to put something separate onto it.
So the Ram has a whole shot the whole Gemara. He learned with too much strings which are totally separate, but from the leftover of the animal, the dirty part of the animal, the wool that got stuck with a bunch of thorns, thistles that got stuck. And the whole problem is Bizayin Mitzvah. Or is that Keli Manveyo? It's missing in the Bizayin of the Mitzvah, which is not the best Yasser in the Pshat in the Rambam. Psula. If it's from existing, let's say you have a ball of thread, and then you afterwards you make tzitzis properly. So you did the asi lishma, but what you didn't do was the tviyah. When you spun it, you didn't have in mind tzitzis. It's kosher. However, no, it has to be spun also lishma. It has to be tviyah lishma. Spinning has to be lishma. Being a lishma. It's actually a machlekes tanaim whether you need lishma. This machlekes is going to be regarding tefillin whether you have to tan the leather, as a step before lishma or not. And we're going to draw a parallel to tzitzis, the same thing. Whether the strings they're going to use for tzitzis, do you have to spin them lishma or not? And where do you see this machlekes? And Taisa said, I have no understanding of this whole Gemara. What in the world does tzitzis have to do with tefillin? By tzitz, you make a whole machlekes by tefillin whether you have to. You're going to say the same machlekes by tzitzis, but by tzitzis it says ta'asa l'cha, and we dashen l'shem chay. When you make tzitzis, do it l'shem shemayim. So l'chayda spinning is part of tasa. By tefillin it doesn't say that, even though it says also l'cha. But we learned more before that l'cha means it should be only for you personally. That's why we know it has to be facing your heart. It's inside here. That's all. So here we have pasuk l'cha. Of course, it has to be l'shma. Mashing tefillin doesn't say so. You have a machlekes. What's the Gemara? Tezah means the Torah Chin, but let's see what the Gemara says. Tzipon zav, you covered the bias of your tefillin. You want to make it nice. You covered it with gold. Or you covered it with the hide of a Talmudic behema. Psulas is possible. Or behema Torah, if you use the hide of a Torah behema, shed is kosher. half official even lishma, even though you did not do the ibud lishma.
Talking about the shape, right?
Talking about not the shape, talking about the bias, the actual bias. You on top of the bias, you put on yeah, I'm sorry, the shade, the cover. You put on top of the bias, behemoth make yeah, even though you didn't lishma. We're talking on top of the pashas. This is what you use for a bias. You use it for a bias. No. Use that for a bias itself. Sorry for that. Even or behemoth toilet puzzle, achi avdon lishman. So say machlek about tzitzis. He said techeles. How does it work? How do you dye the tzitzis with blue? A little later in the next few days, what exactly where the blue comes from. Amalei, my sin of dam chilazon. You bring the blood from this. We'll see later what it is: a worm, a snail, a fish, chilazon. And then you bring salmonin, some kind of herbs or spices. And Taisa says, I don't understand. How can you even have, 1 second, the ramin will be, put them in a pot, this is the test. You have to do a test. And you, sample test. And you heat it up, you boil it up. The shaklina purtabeyos, you take a little bit, you put inside an egg. The tamin lebo, you take a piece of wool, and you dip it in there, you immerse it in there, and then you check. If it comes out proper color, the blue, then you know it's the right thing. And that's how you test that you have enough dye and everything else. So you toss away the beya, the egg, the kalin and you burn the We don't want you to use either one. The dye you put into the egg has been ruined because it's been used once already. And we burn the testing, yeah, exactly. And we burn the wool. Now, why do we do that? Learn 3 things. We learned that if you only test and nobody didn't do the shema, it is possible. Which is really one and the same as Gemara will say. Once you did it once a test, you cannot use it again. In other words, if you would have taken that dye and it was left over in the egg and poured it back in the biggest pot in the world, you ruined the whole thing. And according to Rashi's understanding of this, you use it once, you can never use it again. So, which means, you know how expensive it would be then? You have a big pot of dye. You use that. You put whatever, how much you put in there once. You can't use it again. You got to toss it out and start again. And Chalazon came up once in 70 years. It was like impossible. And Taylor learns he could definitely use it again and again. He has another shot of here. And he says even I feel a may problem me allowed to, as long as you do the Lishma. The problem here wasn't done Lishma, and therefore ruined it. Nothing to do with using it again and again and again. But according to Rashi, whoa! And Rashi holds you have to have 4 strings, with chelis. Very expensive business. You need a lot of chilazons. Anyway, what exactly Samanim was? Tesa asked, how can you mix anything else? It was supposed to be only blue dye, and here suddenly you said you added other things. So Tesa says that this Samanim we're talking about, they somehow or another enable the blue dye to enter the strings. Or he said, Rashi says you put the strings into these herbs. And they're nothing to do with the blue dye. And these samanim, somehow make it more receptive, make the string more receptive to the dye. And then you take the strings, you put them in the dye. So the dye itself is not diluted at all with the samanim. Anyway,
everywhere we mention how they make chelas, we always have yesh oid samanim. We never mention what they are.
No, and no one knows. That's one of the problems is why. Today, when the Gershon Hanach liner that is in the Rebbe who came up with the thing, one of the Tachutzim who the Chalazon in so many opinions on whether this is, and then Rabbi Cook wrote a whole thing to say that he's wrong, but he found something else that's the right thing, different kind of snail. But others said there's a bigger problem. The Samanim. What's the role of Samanim? And what are they? Because the Gemara. No, he doesn't. Yeah, alum, whatever. Was it? Yeah, but we don't know what exactly these are. These are just what you put in. Whether you need all that, you need lishma, but you can use it again. Once you tested it, is possible. It says it says that you need the entire dye for tchelis. That this dye with Ashland is like the first time used, and then so therefore you have the entire dye. But if it's used a second time, part of the dye already has been used up. with the first lot. So it's not kolil tchelis. You need the cold tchelis. The entire original dye has to be used again. And even even the second stage, the third time, second time, it's still kosher. Because it says v'shani to last, and you find elsewhere it says shani that even a second time, to make it a different color, it's good enough. So we learn from there that it doesn't have to be after the first dye. It says that chelis, there's no, you cannot check if something is chelis or if something is kol ilan. That's because the mom is the same. Therefore, you shouldn't buy it only from a mumcha, somebody who knows the dinim that a kol ilan is also, because otherwise, they might. Tefillah, on the other hand, yesh lemedika. Tefillah, you can check what if it's missing letters or more letters. But nevertheless, you should only buy from mumcha. Why? Because there are other dinim involved, like ibud l'shma. Say that you can check yourself, but you can see whether it's done l'shma or not done l'shma. Sfarim umezuzas, sifrei Torah mezuzas, yesh lehem bedika. It's easy to check whether there's missing letters or not. The nichim mikol adam, you can buy it from every single person. What about the ibud l'shma? Because this Tana holds, the way Rashi learns, that you don't need ibud l'shma. You don't need l'shma. And with chelis ain't lebdika. Come back to this in a minute. Chelis has no bedika. Says the Gemara, but Rabbi Yehuda Bodiglei, Rabbi Yehuda checked it. Rabbi Yehuda was able to check to see chelis, what is chelis kolilin. He did mice. He brought in megavia gili. He brought in something that came from a golna juice. I'm not exactly sure what it is. He brought in alum. Umaya de shavlita. He brought in the water from fenugreek. Umay medaglaim and urine. He mixed the three things together. And what kind of may medaglaim? Ben aboim yoim. That was 40 days old, or from a 40-day-old baby. Something special about a 40-year-old baby. And he mixed it together from the morning till at night, and then. If it chazuse, and then you put this dye in. If it got weaker, the shade, the shade of blue became duller, then tzula. It's not a real thing. If despite all this, all these chemicals, it's still as strong as it was before. Then you know that it's chilaz and it's shada. He brought a different test. Chamira Achaz Society would bring their yeast, dry yeast, the afile begave, and then he would go ahead and he put in the he would bake whatever it is. If it improved, and he put he baked this wool thing in there. If the color improved, then kosher, and the Yosef, the color got diminished, psula. With simonach, and the way you to remember is shinui. If there was if it was shinui sheker shinui emes. What do you mean? Sheker is always negative. It's always bad. Then so no, same thing. No, if the color got weakened, then it's possible. But shinui emes, if you change it where it improves it, then it's better. If it's emes, then it's better. No, if you change your words to improve your words, then the same here. If you improve the color. But anyway, my ain lebdika nami the kamar atim. And we said before that chelis has no the chelis. You can check if it's chelis or kolil. What do you tell me? You cannot check it. So is he right? Of course you could check. When we said you cannot check, you don't know if it was the testing. Did they use this merely for testing? We said before that tzvi has to be lishma. You cannot test to see whether they use it for testing the wool or they actually use this for wool itself. So the Gemara, Mar Memashche Eiset, what is it? My Elabdiki Nami the Kamar Atim. He's talking about what? That you cannot test it. Is Mar Memashche, this person, his name of Mr. The name of Zasha's name of Chach, Mister. From a city called Mashcha, he brought chelis, he brought chelis, b'sheni labachi, Shani
is a by steps.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll work it out tomorrow. But one interesting thing here, actually, I'll tell you about tomorrow's thing, like taste on the bottom here. Okay, I'll take a look at taste. Taste on the bottom here, just the beginning of taste. Look at the beginning of taste here. So tefillin. So the Rashi concludes you don't need any, you don't need ibud l'shma when it comes to tefillin. It says. So Rashi said, "Peter Kuntrus." We say we're talking about missing letters. You only buy from a mumcha. la'avdun lishman, right? When it comes to tefillin, but Torah and mezuzah matter. Avos Sfarim and mezuzahs loy by ilishman. There's the chain Peter should have Moshe Bar Maimon. Very, very seldom do you have Tosfos quoting a Rambam. A few times, very seldom. So this is the Rambam writes. Look what he writes there. The mezuzah loy by lishma. The Rambam writes, mezuzah does not need that the tanning should be lishma. The loy pirish minale. Amazing. The Rambam doesn't tell us the sources. The whole Rambam is built without sources, and he makes that's the Ivan's time. But he makes a comment like, by the way, he didn't give us a source, like everything else. He didn't give us a source. That's what the Rambam is. It's very interesting way Tosfos describes that maybe he didn't learn that maybe just got a few pages. Sorry,
maybe that's why he doesn't quote the Rambam more.
Could be, or maybe they didn't have the whole Rambam. They only had a few pages. He had no idea that the other parts of the Rambam, that's in the style.
Tosfos would have had the Rambam.
Okay, but look, he had. He said, maybe this is the mark of the Rambam right here. Anyway, Tosfos argues you do need Lishma, and he's talking about that.
The Rambam's living in
Egypt. Yeah. Okay.